Hi there. Hi, this is a video about perfect passive participles in Latin, PPPs. It's a short introduction essentially for Latin GCSE. Right, so the first thing to get out of the way is what participles actually are. So forget the perfect, forget the passive, just participles. Now, participles work like adjectives, but they are a special type of adjective in that they are formed from verbs. So rather than telling us whether something is tall or short or fat or thin, okay, it's going to tell us what it's doing, or because perhaps if it's perfect and it's passive, then what has been done to it. So that's the first thing. Now, because they are verbal adjectives, they're going to have some characteristics that suggest they are verbs. So, for example, because these are perfect participles, okay, participles we can see have a tense, and because they are passive, participles are also going to have a voice. But participles, we've said, are like adjectives. Now, adjectives in Latin are going to agree with the noun that they are describing, and it's going to be in three ways. That it is going to agree with the noun in terms of gender, whether it's masculine, feminine, or neuter, and also in number, whether it is singular, plural, and also in case, so whether it's nominative, accusative, genitive, for example. Now, if we focus exclusively on PPPs now, perfect passive participles, so it's going to be formed from the fourth principal part of a verb. So, for example, if we look at amo, a very common verb, amo, amare, amawi, amatum, we are going to be using this fourth principal part, the supine. And our PPP is going to look a lot like this, amatus are Now, we often see that us are to show us that it is what is known as a 2-1-2 adjective, or that in the masculine and we can see the second part is feminine and the third part is the neuter. In the masculine, it's going to be second declension. In the feminine, it's going to be first, and in the neuter, it is going to be second again. So in the masculine, if we want our participle to agree with a noun that is masculine, the table is going to go a lot like a second declension masculine noun, i.e. servus. And if it's feminine, a first declension feminine noun like puella, and then in the neuter, a second declension neuter noun like bellum. Okay, so if we have a look at an example, then we need to obviously work out how we're going to translate our PPP. So we can see that our PPP there is captam, it's agreeing with urbem. Okay, they're both feminine, they're both singular, and we can see hopefully from the endings that they are accusative. Okay, now because it's perfect and passive, often we're going to think about that we want to translate it perhaps as having been something. Now that is the kind of textbook way of translating it, but actually we might even want to put the having been in brackets. We might want to just have the something. But the key thing with participles is that we need to be a little bit flexible. But if we have a look at this sentence anyway, so we can see that it's militae, so it's these soldiers. Now what were they doing? They were custodiebant, they were guarding, and we've said that urbem is our accusative, that's our object, so they were guarding the city, but the city is described as having been captured, or perhaps just captured. So the soldiers were guarding the captured city. So we can see there that captured is working as an adjective. It's describing the city, but it's actually really formed from a verb. Now, the tense of the participle, it's important to remember it's relative to the tense of the main verb. So because this is a PPP, a perfect passive participle, it's actually referring to an action that has happened before the action of the main verb. So for example, here we have a nice and straightforward sentence. Delata is our participle agreeing with idificia. Conspeximus is our main verb. We are obviously this. We are the subject, so we caught sight of, what do we catch sight of? The idificia delata, well, the destroyed buildings, the having been destroyed buildings. And so, but how we could translate this is perhaps with an after, because we've said that the tense of the participle is relative to the tense of the main verb. So the destroying is happening before the catching sight of. So perhaps we could say, we caught sight of the buildings after they were destroyed. So we can see that after is going to be a good way to translate a PPP, after they were destroyed. There we go. Now, another thing to think about is that when we have a participle, generally it will be next to the noun that it's describing, but occasionally there might be a few words in between, in which case we want to translate everything in between the noun and the participle as a kind of phrase altogether. So here we can see that punitum is our participle, but it's actually separated from its noun, servum, and so we need to translate the R domino together. So perhaps adjui is I helped. So I helped the slave, but it's the slave that is described as punitum ar domino, punished by the master. So perhaps I helped the slave, punished by the master. Or maybe who was punished by the master after he was punished by the master. So again, we can see that we need to be flexible when it comes to translating participles. Now, sometimes, last little bit, participles will appear on its noun on its own. That should read on its own with no noun to agree with. And in this case, we simply need to assume, depending on the gender of the participle, who it is that the participle is describing. So here, vulneratus is our participle. Okay, it's quite clearly masculine, and so we assume that it's just the man. So we're going to translate this as the wounded man. Well, what did the wounded man do? He yekita hastum. He threw a spear. And that's essentially